Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is City of Chattanooga Mayor Tim Kelly. Mayor Kelly is a native Chattanoogan, entrepreneur, businessman, and co-founder of Chattanooga Football Club. He is nearing the end of his initial term as mayor of the City of Chattanooga and has announced his intentions to seek a second term. Mayor Kelly, welcome back to My Morning Cup. Before we peel the onion on what running the City of Chattanooga is really like, remind me, what's in your morning cup?
Coffee. Good old-fashioned coffee.
Good old-fashioned coffee.
Whatever I can get. You know, I cut my teeth in the car business years ago, and, you learn to drink a lot of really bad coffee.
Oh, it's horrendous coffee.
It's terrible, and that's fine. That's part of it. So, I'm not picky about my coffee.
You know who had the best coffee in a dealership? It wasn't the sales guys out front. It was the guys working in the service area.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, they a lot of times would keep their own pot.
Yeah.
So sales and service are like these two different. They're kind of like brothers that don't particularly get along, in inside the dealership. Anybody that's ever been around a dealership can tell you that. And they're totally different cultures inside the same business.
I grew up in a dealership atmosphere, not cars, in materials handling equipment. So we had forklifts. Mm-hmm. And if I remember correctly, the service technicians would not only have their pot of coffee, they'd keep the nuts and bolts they had to strip grease off of inside that same pot.
Well, yeah. I think we've learned a thing or two about chemicals' effect on the human body since then. But yeah, boy, those were the days. I could tell you, we could spend the entire podcast telling old car business stories. It was quite a place to to grow up in.
Yeah. Well, we may need to do that.
Fine.
But we're here talking about City of Chattanooga, and you're ending your first term. Mm-hmm. What surprised you most when you took office? What was the thing that you really didn't, I don't want to say appreciate, but that you just said, didn't realize that would be as big a part of this job as it is?
Well, there are a lot. There are quite a few things. It's tougher. It's tougher to affect change than you would think. Again, at the risk of sounding, it's kind of an axiomatic truth, but it bears repeating. Government has no competition, and absent somebody kind of driving change in a super demonstrative way, in a way that requires a lot more intention and effort than being the CEO of a private business. Ironically, you really have to. You can't just sort of utter pronouncements and expect that people will do them. They will wait you out a lot of times, and the entropy factor is very high, right? I mean, again, at the risk of, there are people who probably got jobs in government in order to just be left alone, right? And that's my point is that's not why we're there. And so, that part has been. There's no magic wand in the desk. I've searched it high and low, and there's not one there. So it takes a lot longer to do things. I mean, and I'm now come up at least with, if I have one ancillary goal, it's to kind of shorten the gestation period for a project. So, for example, good example, day one, walked in the door saying, our website's terrible. Yep. It needs to be more responsive. Let's get the ball rolling on getting that done. We just got it done in October.
It's a long time.
3 years.
Yeah.
Or 3 years and change. So, I mean, it's a real thing.
Well, as a businessman, your whole career, and you decide to run for office, and you hear so many people say today, we got to run government like a business. Mm-hmm. How much of that is a truth, and how much of that is that we'll wait you out, that doesn't allow you to do that?
Well, there are elements of that are true and elements that are not true, right? So in the sense that we need to be more, again, I think in retrospect, more than I ever really realized, a career in retail really prepared me well for city government, because it is retail. I mean, as I say all the time, we're a 2,600 person services delivery organization. That's what we do. It's what we should do, right? We're not there to serve ourselves. We're there to serve the public and make Chattanooga the best city it can be. And we are kind of that baseline engine that kind of keeps the whole thing rocking along in theory. And that part of it is just like a business. And my job is just like a CEO's job of a 2,600 person services delivery organization. And because there's a real difference, which we can talk more about, between executive political functions and legislative political functions. And I think that's where we get twisted. We get people who are good at legislative politics who move over into a mayor's role or a governor's role, and they're terrible at it.
Yeah.
Conversely, you talk to a guy like Bob Corker, and Bob's been on the show. He would tell you that. He's told me that. It's no secret. He was bored out of his mind in the Senate. Right. Yeah. I mean, I would be terrible at legislative politics, but it is very different. And that part of it is very much like being in business. Now, what's not is, we don't return dividends to shareholders. We try to be as good as stewards with taxpayer money as we can. But, we don't have, like everybody is our customer, certainly everybody in the city of Chattanooga. So you can't, it's not exactly, it's like probably being the CEO of a nonprofit. But that is also very much like being the CEO of a private company, except for some notable differences. But it's more like it. I would just wrap it up this way. It's more like it than not. People that tell you business is not government are smoke screening. Well,
and I think your point that it's retail politics and retail business are basically the same thing. Yep. You're serving a constituency and you're having to deliver for them. But I think you brought out a great point. The big difference is the executive and the legislative.
Huge difference. And again, I would add that to the stack of things that have surprised me. Really, really powerful realization that I didn't realize till I got there, how vastly different they are and how vastly the kind of personality profiles and the aptitudes are. Maybe I will write a book about that because again, when you see kind of mayoral disasters, and there are plenty, here and elsewhere, but that's generally what's behind it. You got somebody who just isn't really wired for this job. I mean, we have a strong mayor model in Chattanooga, and I would argue that as long as we have that model, you had better, whether it's me or somebody else, you'd better be hiring somebody who has some actual management experience, because if you don't, it ain't good. Things go downhill quickly.
Yeah. Just like in a business.
Yeah, just like in a business.
What was the pressure coming in as a business leader and a leader, and what's that pressure every day that people expect out of you because you grew up here?
I did,
and people that you grew up with know you as Tim, but you also are the mayor.
Well, you're right. No, but look, I like pressure. I'm a drummer. I'm a goalkeeper. I've only ever wanted to play goalkeeper. I still play adult league. And people are like, how do you do that? It's a mindset, really. If I played, football, I never did. I played a little bit of football, but I'd be a kicker probably, right? Because, I like the pressure. So the pressure doesn't bother me.
You want the ball in your hands, basically.
Yeah, I do. And this, again, I came up through the Rotary Club and, in the nonprofit world here, and I feel like, I can carry the ball. And so it's an honor and a privilege in a city like this at a time like this to be carrying the ball. So that doesn't bother me. I don't ever feel pressure in that regard. Like, oh God, am I good enough? That may sound, arrogant or something, but I know this city as well as anybody, maybe not better, but as well. And I feel like, we've got the problems right and we've got a really good team assembled. And again, we're rolling along. So the pressure, it doesn't bother me. It is weird being just, a normal guy without further, political ambitions and having that meta identity of, people I've known my whole life as, hey, Tim, oh, hello, Mr. Mayor. Suddenly it's like this invisible bubble around me and that takes a little getting used to. But as we were saying off air beforehand, it is sort of this meta identity, and you have to get used to it, and you have to own it and recognize that, people have eyes on you when you're out in public, and there's a certain sort of mantle of leadership that you have to own. And that's okay.
I would imagine probably the first 6 months, year, getting used to that, being in public and almost being on display.
Yeah.
You walk into a restaurant and oh, there's the mayor. And you're like,
Yeah.
I just need a table.
That's, and that's it. And it was super weird at first, and it's gotten easier now, but it's nice. People don't bother me, right? There's sometimes I'll go out and nobody says anything, and I'm like, do they even know who I am? Do they care? Fortunate. And then other times I can't even get to the table, right? So, and it's odd. I don't know if that has to do. I've never really patterned it as far as does it have to do with what I've got on? I do know that putting a hat on helps.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's fine, right? I don't mind it a bit. And, people are like, oh, and nobody's ever, in 3.5 years, nobody's ever been hostile or rude. I mean, I've said this 1,000 times as well. It's my preparation in the car business was really helpful because I used to go out and people would say, hey, that car you sold me is making a funny noise, and now it's, hey, they missed my garbage, but it's
the same thing.
Same thing.
Yeah. In terms of pressure, we got a really big thing coming with the new Lookout Stadium.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Not how the project came about, but how you were able to marshal that through, because there's a lot of moving pieces on it.
Yeah. Well, again, part of the reason I did this, I'd say maybe the main reason I did it, was I felt like we needed in Chattanooga a little more bold leadership, right? I mean, if you know that the thing is the right thing to do, then just do it, right? And you'll either be right or you'll be wrong. I've got a bunch of old car business jokes I could tell you about that, but do it and devil take the hindmost, right? And so this is one of those things where I'm 100% sure that it was the right thing to do, and it was done in the right way with the right partners, and damn the torpedoes, right? I mean, again, if I'm wrong, I guess I'll pay the price down the road. But guess what? I'm not wrong. I mean, again, people will, when it's done, they will. I bet you lunch or whatever you want to bet. People are going to go, wow, how did we ever live without this? This is amazing. It's going to be amazing. And the development's going to be great, and it's going to be fantastic, right? But it takes a fair amount of. I'm not trying to accumulate political capital to go spend it on something else. So if I accumulate it, I'm going to spend it on the things that I think are the visionary projects that are going to move the city forward, and that's one of them.
How important was this particular time in Chattanooga's history to that project?
Incredibly. This is a project that had been percolating. This, and I would say the West Side, were ones, and again, no aspersions on any prior predecessors, but there were a number of projects that had just kind of been on the back burner that would have required some courage and some political capital, and they didn't get moved forward. And that's one of the first things I came in with Jim Coppinger, saying, let's get these things off dead center and get them moving. And so the Lookout Stadium is really the first one we kind of dragged out of the dusty old file and said, let's crank it up and go, and that's what happened.
Well, and to your point, it is going to be, I think, fabulous beyond people's imagination. It's opening up a part of the city that needs to be reopened and present a much better gateway.
Well, that, again, I was just in Tampa at the National League of Cities meeting, and I ran into somebody who knew Chattanooga, came through Chattanooga all the time, but, didn't live here. But they were like, if it were nothing but a facade, that you could see from 24, it would be pretty great, because that aspect is a bonus, frankly, because the thing in and of itself is going to be fantastic, but it will be a nice bonus.
Yeah, I remember it was someone from the chamber talking about when they would bring prospects into town and you'd come around Moccasin Bend. When you would get to that turn, you'd say, look over there at the river. So you wouldn't look over it.
Well, again, Chattanooga, over the course of, you and I both lived in that same world. I've been on the Chamber of Commerce board a couple of different times, and it had been so long. I mean, our longitudinal growth rate here in prior to about 2003 or 4 or 5, I think, is now Howard Wall, the economist at UTC. We now have a fortunate to have him there looking at, I don't know if he's been on, he should be on if he hasn't. But prior to about 2005, we had the worst longitudinal growth rate of any city within 500 miles of here.
Explain longitudinal.
Well, in other words, growth rate over time, over the previous 20, 30 years. And so I think we had developed a bit of a loser's limp, this idea that, can never happen here and it's not worth trying. And you kind of had this crab pot mentality where people are like, and it's just, we have to break out of that. And I think we are starting to break out of that.
How important is leadership to breaking out of that?
Critically important. It's critically important. And again, it's risky for me, but that's why I ran, is to move the city forward. And so again, maybe I'm a madman, maybe I'm wrong. I guess so we have elections, folks. But I don't think so.
So the first time you ran, was it out of frustration that things weren't moving as quickly as you thought they should be?
Largely, yes.
So when you come in, it's let's dust off and find out
you got it.
What we've got shovel ready, for lack of better description.
You got it. Yeah. It was the Episcopal, forgiveness of sins talks about, I'm always thinking about this. Like, you ask for forgiveness for things done and left undone.
Yeah.
And in leadership, the left undone stuff, it weighs a lot heavier. And so that's, again, I think about that almost daily.
So when you think about your responsibilities to the city and you think about those almost daily, what are those most important things that the average person doesn't think about?
Well, again, the racial wealth gap here is a huge part of it, and it doesn't play well at the country club, but I don't care, right? Because it is a critically important thing to moving this city forward, and it's one of those things that you don't think about it if you are a person of privilege, whatever your color is. But the gaps in income and net worth here are really, really, really gross, grotesque, very broad. Mm-hmm. And divided economies don't work. They ultimately don't work, right? And so where this kind of comes full circle to working for everybody is the work that I did prior to being in the mayor's office on Chattanooga 2.0 and what we call, in Europe, they call it skills development. We call it workforce development. But, the way that you get people making more money is to train them in new careers, which dovetails very nicely to the goals of industry, right? And so that is how we will wind up moving the city forward. Not a lot of people think about that, but it requires, and Mayor Wampa's been a great partner in this regard. It really is going to require some significant reform in the way that our schools work, in the way that our certificate programs work in 2-year schools, and frankly, reform at the state and federal level, which I've been very involved in. So that is a real opportunity for us. But it's one of those things that most people are like, huh? They just don't. You wouldn't think about it unless you were in government. You wouldn't.
No, and I don't think the average citizen understands the racial gap when it comes to incomes and what's being done about it now, at least from my perspective. Places like Chattanooga State and their workforce development and the teaming up with just someone like the Association of General Contractors and what they have going. It's almost like we poo-pooed skills and send people to college to get a degree.
Well, I blame it on the Cosby Show, but there was look, everybody should have the chance to go to Harvard, right? Will everybody go to Harvard? No. And more importantly, I think the problem we had was what we used to call vocational education became, I think, fairly or unfairly, it was as though that was for these people and college was for these people. And nothing we do should ever preclude an alternate pathway, right? I mean, that I think is the problem, is that it became, we threw out the baby with the bathwater. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can make a really good living. The mayor of Tempe and I, Corey Woods, were just on a panel at the National League of Cities. He's an African-American gentleman. I mean, went to college, but I mean, he and I are co-chair of the education task force for the National League of Cities and had a really productive panel talking about the same thing because there are great careers there, and they're not, they don't preclude critical thinking. They're not lesser than, I mean, in any way, shape, or form. So yes, the Career Construction Academy is a huge step in that direction that we did with the Associated General Contractors, the county, to train kids in construction careers, which, again, Mayor Wamp very eloquently pointed out, is also a pathway to entrepreneurship because a lot of those guys will wind up, and women, owning their own electrical contracting businesses or, any number of general contracting or subcontracting businesses. It's we've got to get back to that. And this is an area where I think Chattanooga is leading and can continue to lead the country.
You mentioned some of the national boards you're on with other mayors.
Yep.
How important is that in terms of bringing ideas back to the city in cooperation across the country?
It's massive. Again, in the car business, I was a huge fan. Would not have stayed in the car business without the concept of a 20 group, which is something that was started by a consultancy out of Overland Park, Kansas, called Nichols Campbell Mara years ago. And what they did, and it's since expanded to a lot of other industries, started with the car business, but you would come in as a dealer from Chattanooga, and there'd be a dealer from San Luis Obispo, and a dealer from Trenton, New Jersey, and a dealer from Naples, and you would all submit your financial statements, and then they would slice and dice all the financials, give it back to you in a big book composite, so you could level set and say, hey, what are you spending on advertising? How do you pay your salesman? How did your parts department do so well last month, right? And then you level set with metrics on best practices. Well, running a city is really the same thing. It is the same. If you go back to that retail analogy, we are all service delivery organizations. Now, we don't get that far in the weeds in terms of level setting on financials. I don't know anybody doing that. But I mean, I have more to talk about with the mayor of Sarajevo than I do with my state legislator, honestly, because all cities are exactly the same in most fundamental ways. So, Bloomberg does an incredible job of this. Bloomberg had partners with Harvard on a leadership institute that I'm part of. And that's what we do. Mayors get together, and we just down in Mexico City a little while back. And that's it. Share best practices. And it's hugely helpful.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the car dealership example, because that's pretty common, having those associations and peer groups and things like that in business. And it seems to be becoming a bigger deal in government.
It should be, because, again, we need to learn from each other. Matter of fact, the concept is super powerful. So we were also part of a convening that the Atlanta Fed did, which kudos to them. They didn't have to do this, called the Southern Cities for Economic Inclusion. And it was about best practices on economic mobility, which is one of our core goals in all these southern cities. And out of that came our Builder's Blueprint program, which again removes some obstacles for minority contractors to be able to, break into business and be able to bid more jobs and so on. But that's how that came about. And through those conversations, hopefully, I'm actually going to get them to convene state workforce development groups from across the Southeast so they can compare best practices. So I'm a huge fan.
Well, and the other thing it does, it gives Chattanooga exposure to the mayor of Tempe.
Well, right.
Or other places like that, and possibly even bring some of those folks here for inner-city visits.
We've got a good reputation. Everybody knows EPB. In civic government services, we are, we're well known as being kind of out there on the leading edge of things.
What is the take of Chattanooga nationally among your peers? When you meet someone, they go, "Oh, Chattanooga," they probably already have a familiarity. But what's the takeaway there?
I mean, again, it's good. They look at us as a very smart, on-the-move city. I think the main thing is EPB. I mean, everybody knows in government circles, they're all aware of the fact that, we have this incredible, we had the very first municipal broadband in the United States. I mean, that is a huge deal. And kudos to Kinsey and Corker and all the guys that came before, and Harold DePriest, because it turns out that was, again, because we had this terrible longitudinal growth rate, it was a bit of a Hail Mary. I mean, there's a reason we were the first, because everybody else probably thought they were nuts, but they thought, well, nothing else seems to be working. We'll try this, I guess. But it did work. It has worked famously well. And now, and matter of fact, a great story. I'm in another group of there's a organization called the OECD, the Organization for Economic Community Development, based in Paris, all the industrialized countries in the world. And it is a best practice sharing and metric sharing organization. Hugely helpful. If you go to business school and you're studying, healthcare and developed economies, all the best data is from the OECD. I mean, it's the gold standard. So it's a real privilege to be asked to be on this mayoral council that they do. Well, I'm in a meeting with a bunch of those mayors. I say a bunch, they're on a ton, 10, 20 in Mexico City. And we get done, and the mayor of Liverpool wanders up and says, "I just want to let you know that your predecessor, Andy Burke, gave a presentation on municipal broadband 9 years ago, and it so inspired me that I went back to Liverpool and we did it."
Wow.
And we did it, and it's been the greatest thing we've done, and I just want to thank you. And I haven't even had a chance to tell Mayor Burke thank him, but case in point.
Yeah. So Chattanooga gave something back to the birthplace of the Beatles when we took their Music.
You got it. I was very proud of that. Very proud of that.
That's something good to be on the map for.
Yeah.
I just attended the Thrive Tri-State Summit. Passenger rail was a big conversation piece on there. And I know we've got some things coming in terms of passenger rail. There's recently money approved for beyond a study, isn't it?
Well, it's a study. I mean, it's more of a study. It's just a closer, it's an actual feasibility study. What do we need to do? It's $500,000. I think the paper mischaracterized it because it's federal money. But when we get federal money, council has to accept it. I mean, as though they wouldn't, right?
Yeah.
But they do. And so they did. And so off we go, right?
It's not Chattanooga taxpayer money.
No. So, yes, but I mean, there's a great deal of enthusiasm. And again, I was talking to somebody else about this the other day. This is a very practical plan. I'm enthusiastic and optimistic that we may be able to make it work because Butch Ely, who I consider a friend and is instrumental at the state level. He's held a number of key positions there, but is now really kind of the right hand of the governor and running the Department of Transportation. And, those guys are, when all this started, I went to talk to Senator Blackburn about it, and my chief of staff at the time, who was very well left of center, said, hey, psst, Republicans hate trains, right? So maybe don't talk about that. And I'm like, look, I'm going to talk about it because I think it's a good idea. And she hates it, but she didn't hate it. And I think, again, we'll see. I mean, obviously, Republican administrations tend to not want to spend as much money on that kind of infrastructure, but has been my comms director pointed out, right? Like, yeah, will it cash flow? Will it make money? Probably not. I mean, it might. There are these Brightline projects in South Florida that do. But again, if that were the standard for public infrastructure, every road would be a toll road, wouldn't it? So we'll see. I mean, but I think we've got support from the state of Tennessee and the state of Georgia, to keep moving until we have a reason to stop moving. And again, this is not high-speed rail for better or for worse, but it is a practical plan.
Still rail.
It's still rail. And I mean, again, I think a part of the heck of it is going to be to figure out, every little town along the way is going to want to put a stop in. And then, okay, well, if we do too much of that, it would slow it down too much. But if you're, will it be as fast as getting in the car and driving? No. But you don't have to park.
More convenient.
You've got Wi-Fi, you've got a bathroom, you've got food and drink. There's a great deal of enthusiasm, particularly in Nashville for this. And again, at the federal level, they really want to connect Chicago with Atlanta.
They got to come
through here. They got to come through Chattanooga. It's the same thing that made us so instrumental during the Civil War.
Yeah.
There is another route that a whole another school of thought that says we need to come down from the eastern seaboard. Well, guess what? Still got to come through Chattanooga.
That's why they had all those Sea Rock City signs.
You got it. Either way, I mean, it's no different than, Sherman and Grant. You want to get to Atlanta, you got to come through Chattanooga. That's it.
You talked about going to a Republican senator and talking about rail. Mm-hmm. How important, in your opinion, is nonpartisan local elections?
I think it's critically important. It's critically important because this is the only major country in the world that has two parties, and it just reinforces a false dualism. If you've ever read George Orwell's 1984, it's all right there for you. Where one side, I'm red jersey, you're blue jersey, and we just can't. I mean, that's it, right? I can't possibly put on the blue jersey or the red jersey. I mean, I can't do that. It becomes there's a book by a guy named Jonathan Haidt called The Righteous Mind that talks about this through sort of anthropological a lens, and it's spot on, right? And so being nonpartisan and saying I don't have a jersey. The endorsement that I made during the last presidential election sort of got in the way of that a little bit, but I've tried to straighten it out with people. I mean, I felt like I owed it to people to explain why that was, because Democratic administrations tend to invest more in cities, but that doesn't make me partisan. I'm not some sort of a secret partisan. I mean, I can work with anybody. And I think, there's been a saying that's been bandied about. I think it's absolutely true that there are really three political parties in the United States. I probably said it the first time we did this podcast: Republicans, Democrats, and mayors, because we have to be relentlessly practical. And I can work with anybody, honestly.
How can we, beyond the mayors, get past the party over country aspect?
I've actually thought more about this than you might imagine. I mean, I wrote an op-ed about this when I was at Baylor, an editor at the Baylor high school newspaper. I wrote something about needing a third party in the United States. That's how long this has been on my mind. Couple years.
Yeah.
40, in fact, 40 years ago. And so, look, I think it would be much healthier for the United States. I think we have a structural problem in that the cradle for our party politics is in state houses across the country. And if you go to a state house, good luck, right? Getting on a committee. And so that's beyond my pay grade at this point. I mean, there are other people that are kind of thinking about how that might work, but it's pretty dysfunctional. It really is. And so, look, I meditate a lot on the old serenity prayer, and that's why I got into this job to begin with. You can control things. We at the local level can control things at the local level. You can go vote in a local election and decide what happens in a much more direct way than you can at the state and federal level, which, by the way, are abstractions, right? They don't really exist. They're just lines on a piece of paper. We live here together, right? And we can make decisions about the things that really matter to quality of life. Good jobs, good schools, good roads, public safety, all that stuff is local. So we have the whole thing upside down to a great extent. And if we just turn off our damn televisions, whether it's MSNBC or Fox News, and talk to each other, which we do a pretty good job of in Chattanooga, honestly. I mean, we have a pretty strong sense of community here and a pretty strong sense of that relative to other cities where I hear a lot of horror stories. But we'd all be better off.
As a former TV guy, I never thought I would agree with that, but I do.
Here's the spin for local. I mean, my one exception to that is local news, right? I mean, I talked to all the current producers. I'm just and you're not your old station, but one of the others. I'll say Callie Starnes at 3. Has really kind of leaned into that with their branding and so on. I mean, it's
absolutely
local, and that's what it should be.
Well, and that's always been the strength of local broadcast television, is embracing your local community, making a difference in your local community, and being that largest stick to make the announcements that people need to hear.
Yeah.
So related to that, as an average citizen out there, what can they do, in your opinion, to help make this a better city? Because I do think we benefit from not just the successes we've had leading up to this point, but kind of that cachet we have nationally.
No doubt. Get involved in something, right? I mean, we're both Rotarians, and our Rotary Club is still one of the biggest and the healthiest and the most vibrant, I think, in the country. And I think we should never take that for granted, right? So whether it's Kiwanis or Rotary or whatever, not that you need to go join a civic club, but those are important because they are this kind of glue that binds us together. And not everybody, as you well know, in civic clubs agrees with each other, votes the same way, prays the same way, eats the same way, believes the same way, but you all sit in that room together knowing, like, listening to speakers about subjects of interest in Chattanooga. And that sounds trivial, but it is not trivial, right? So, but again, how do you, for those who don't know, if you want to join a civic club, what's the first thing to look at? What's your nonprofit, right? What have you done, right? So go volunteer. I don't care if it's the Salvation Army or the food bank or Big Brothers Big Sisters. We are only as good as the kind of civic fabric that we're woven from. And I can tell you that, City Hall can't do it all. I mean, we have a bunch of boards and commissions that need good people. But some of the more difficult moments I've had in the mayor's office thus far have been failures, and I won't get into details unless you want me to, but failures where you go back to board governance at a nonprofit, and it's just a failure of board government. We need good, smart, engaged people who love this community to get involved in it. And look, that's, I think, the older I get, the meaning of life. I mean, we all need to make money, but you get to this point, and I think data shows, right, that where you've kind of reached the enough money point, and I certainly did, where I'm like, okay, that's it. Now what, right? Like I don't want. I mean, this is one of the things that's kind of, we're working on some brand voice issues around Chattanooga. We've talked about this, right? There's the more to life thing. That's one of the things that, because if people are super acquisitive and want to drive a Ferrari and fly a private plane, I mean, there are exceptions to every rule, but generally you're not here. You're going to be in New York or Miami or even Atlanta or Nashville. So, this place has a very strong sense of community. And I think that's the meaning of life, right? Is giving back to your community. So that's what I would ask is go get involved in something.
Well, and particularly for folks, if you haven't lived in other communities.
Yeah.
I spent a year and a half commuting to Montgomery, and not to knock Montgomery, but it's not Chattanooga.
Right.
And
very few places are.
Yeah, and that's the truth, though. There's very few places that are Chattanooga. We had Paris here with us today, and she's from New Orleans, and I grew up in Memphis, and we were talking about how we both love our hometowns, but we're really glad we're here.
Yeah.
It's
special, and I don't know why it's special. I've never been able to put my finger on it exactly. I mean, I could opine, for the rest of our time, but it is, and I've come to realize that it is. And other people, the most extraordinary thing to me is that people move in here from outside, and what I used to kind of think, pass for boosterism isn't really, right? I mean, people will come here and say, no, it's different. It is different because it is easier to plug into, and you do have that spirit of community without the kind of sense of resignation, that you have in other cities where people are just like, it doesn't matter. I can't, we can't do it. It's too hard.
Well, in so many of the larger cities, the Atlantas, the Nashvilles, are made up by so many people who their job is to get on an airplane on Monday and go until Friday. So you really don't have a sense of community there.
I think that's an incredibly insightful observation, and I think that's exactly right. Atlanta, in some ways, is just a transient city. It's like a heart, and all the people are just kind of like blood flowing through and out again, right? And that's why they're there. You know, and most of them are sort of like senior VPs that are going to wind up in another city before too long. So they don't. There's not
invest.
A rootedness there, I mean, there are. I mean, I know a lot of old school Atlantans. My dad's family's all from Atlanta. They're there, but they're sort of eclipsed by that huge core of transient people.
Yeah, because and I'll use an example of a good buddy of mine who worked for years in Chicago, who just retired to Telco, and his leaving, it was actually Naperville. Leaving Naperville was no big deal.
Yeah.
I've got my poker club, I got my friends, but you're not invested in the community, not a member of a civic club, not volunteering for things.
Nope, that's it, right? Join the tennis league, and then what happened to old Joe? Well, he got transferred to Denver, and that's just cavalier there. It's just that's how life is wired up, And in a way, again, another analogy that may relate to retail, we are a destination. We're not the strip mall that you drive by, and so you got to want to be here.
Yep.
I mean, at the risk of stating the obvious. And it's become a bit of a self-selection filter. A lot of the people that, we got some real, I think since we last talked, become aware that we've got some serious heavy hitters that had moved in here from elsewhere, from various parts during the pandemic. And they want to be here and they want to get plugged in the community. And that's why they're here.
Yeah. And I would echo that and say the best way for them to make it better is to invest.
You got it.
Invest time and talent.
You got it.
I got a couple more questions for you before we get to the last one and before we run out of time.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about city within a park.
Okay. So the National Park City movement was founded in London by a guy named Daniel Raven Ellison, who is kind of almost a sort of cartoonish, cavalier Englishman, world traveler type, straight out of central casting at, National Geographic.
Yeah.
But he cast a really compelling vision, which is to think of a city, in the first case London, later Adelaide, and hopefully next Chattanooga, as not so much, a city with parks in it, but as a big park with city in it. Sort of invert that, right? And it sounds a little, kumbaya at first. I mean, it certainly did to me. But it's a very powerful concept in that it puts the parks and the relationship to nature at the center of things. And, for a place like Chattanooga, so again, a little bit of a departure here, but I went through business school late in life and loved corporate strategy. I had a professor named Robert Kazanjian at Emory who made a huge impact on me. And, he was drilling down heavily on a daily basis on the concept of competitive advantage, right? What does your organization do or have that you do better than anybody else and that nobody else is likely to be able to copy? And if you can't answer that, then you ain't going to be in business very long, right? I mean, you need to be able to answer that question. Well, for Chattanooga, that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk to people, in other cities, I mean, Nashville and Atlanta would kill for our landscape and our access to the outdoors. That's the thing. That's our special sauce. And so, when I heard the National Park City concept, I'm like, it's a no-brainer, right? And the recognition, the global recognition that will come from that, and the way that it changes the way people think about themselves in relationship to nature, I think is very powerful. I've used this analogy before, but it's been said that if you're going to quit smoking, the way to do that, somewhat counterintuitively, is to stop thinking of yourself as a smoker. And in the same way, right, if you think of yourself as living in a park with city in it, you're probably not going to throw that wrapper out the window.
Right.
Or if you do, you're going to pick it up. Somebody else walking by is going to pick it up, right? And look, I'm first and foremost a marketing guy, and it's kind of a really clever, organic, no pun intended there, but kind of grassroots branding exercise in some ways.
Well, and it's encouraging people to take care of their front yard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I spent a week in London this past summer, and I was blown away by the city and park concept because I had heard it before I got there. As a matter of fact, can't remember.
Scott Martin?
Yes, Scott Martin first used it. But everywhere we went, we were walking through a park. Yeah. Everywhere. So, and it became, we weren't walking through a park. We were walking through the city of London. That, my God, I didn't know they had all of this.
Yeah.
This outdoor.
Yeah. No, that's it exactly. And again, there's a reason they are the first, and then Adelaide, Australia was the second, and we would be the third on the planet. And the movement really has gotten a lot of momentum. So it's a big deal for Chattanooga to be in that company, and there will be more behind us if we are designated. And I'm hopeful that we will be either later this year or early next year.
And that's a nonpartisan issue. That's a lifestyle.
It's completely nonpartisan. Yeah. I mean, again, there's so many issues like this that really have been made partisan for, selfish purposes for whatever reason. But no, it's not at all partisan. Yeah.
Are there issues like that you can identify that can help move the needle forward here? The other nonpartisan issues that.
Well, and again, that one I think is super important simply because, it's, as I say all the time, and this is the fault of the left, right? If you're, if the way that you're trying to sell something is moral superiority, and making people feel guilty about themselves, then you're not going to get far. I mean, we saw how the deplorable thing worked out.
Yeah.
It's just dumb, and that approach is just, it's not, stupid hurts. It doesn't work. And so, look, if you're talking about sustainability strategies, they also save you a lot of money and or are very valuable from an economic development perspective. So speak the love language of the other side of the aisle if you're trying to get something done. And I'm fortunate to be able to speak both languages. So, that's my job. Now, as far as other, I don't know. I mean, we could talk about, again, the economic development issue, the racial disparity thing, that's another one. Again, if it's something that we need to heal in southern cities, that's the legacy of slavery and racism. But at the same time, it's a workforce development issue. It's going to meet the needs of industry and allow us to have a healthier economy. So again, why does it have to be one side or the other?
Well, why wouldn't you want half your city or half your population not to have success?
Right.
It increases the tax base. It makes it a better place to live.
Well, and it gets back to community. Look, if you live in a gated community and you go to the golf club every day, and I have a lot of friends that do, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's a free country. Do what you want. But it's easy to not see the hard stuff, right? But my job is to see the hard stuff. I have to see everybody and everything and act in the best interest of everybody and everything. So it's not surprising to me when people are like, what is all that about, right? Well, you live in your bubble if you want, but that's not my job.
I like the way you put that. It's your job to see everything.
It is.
Because you're the mayor of everyone.
You got it.
Yeah. All right, before I get to the last question, I do want to remind our listeners who makes all this possible, and that's the Tennessee Valley Authority. I thank them for sponsoring My Morning Cup. Follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service, and visit TVA.com/do good here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. All right, last question, Mayor Kelly. What would you tell your 53-year-old self, first term mayor, is important for maintaining a happy life?
Wow. I would say, again, at the risk of stating the obvious, work-life balance, right? Unfortunately, went through a divorce here recently, and when you go through something like that, you wind up kind of beating yourself up a lot about what you could have done differently or might have done differently, and I'm totally at peace with it. But it's a very consuming job, and I love it, and I feel like I'm doing work that God has intended me to do. But, and so I don't know that I would have done it any differently, honestly, because the job is the job is the job. But there are sacrifices, there are sacrifices in time. I mean, you can go 12 hours a day, 6 days a week if you let your staff take you there.
Yeah.
And, so, work-life balance is a real thing. And, I'm a hard charger. So may have dialed it back just a little bit. Although, I don't, when I'm done, I want the list of stuff left undone to be as small as possible. I know there will be things that I look back and say, I wish I'd gotten to that, but I want that to be a short list.
You don't want your successor coming in and dusting off a plan that's been sitting on the bookshelf for 8 years.
I will not do that to my successor.
Well, I tell you, I appreciate you coming in today and talking about this. I appreciate your friendship.
Yeah, likewise.
I'm glad you're our mayor.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It's an honor.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Consta Media Advisors. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.